Hello and welcome. This is What the Stories Say. If this is your first time here, I am your host, Dr. Pauline Baird. I'm a cultural bearer from the village of Buxton. I tell our stories, our family histories, our whispered stories, our long lost and sometimes forgotten traditions. And as we say in my village, Buxton, what the stories say. Today I have stories for you. I want you to listen. Oh, what am I wearing? I'm wearing Dara Dara. Dara is my sister, my baby sister, as I say. She's a grown woman, but she's an entrepreneur and single mom, and she's doing things. So if you like to wear linen, chic clothing, and accessories like these, check her out on Instagram, Dara Dara Handmade. And before you go and listen to the story I have prepared for you, I want you to click that button that says follow if you're on Facebook. And click that button subscribe if you're on YouTube. Let's share the love. Share this thing like food. Like, comment. Thank you very much and listen. We are here with Miss Elsie Harry, the Elsie Harry in Guyana. Welcome to What the Story Say.
Thank you. You know, I've been wanting to come on What the Story Say for a long time, so I'm happy to finally be here.
Yes, and we'll talk about how you grow so big. I've been asking women and other people around the world, and especially in Guyana, about this experience of how you grow so big. Because I want to unpack our stories so that others can learn from us, to be inspired, and to think deeply about the journeys. Because as a cultural rhetorician, my job is to bring the stories of processes and steps and how things are done. Because oftentimes we take for granted that that's known. So let me talk story. How you grow so big?
Well, I think that it's because I'm a daddy's girl. I'm also a mommy's girl too, actually. So let me tell you the story.
You better put it right because they're gonna be listening.
I'll tell you the story.
Right.
So I was born on my father's birthday, but I was also born on Mother's Day.
Wow, that's interesting. Do your friends know about this?
They know this. They know this. So on May 10th, 1992.
You age yourself.
Sunday. Yeah.
You tell us your age
yes,
too.
I'm proud to be 30 because I don't look 30, you know.
Okay. I'll take that.
So May 10th, 1992 was Mother's Day. And it was also my dad's birthday.
Right.
And my mom was getting ready to go to work and she was pregnant with me. And she thought that she wanted to use the toilet.
I heard about that. That this thing comes like you want to go to the bathroom.
Yes.
And you're the first child.
No, I'm the last.
Okay.
So
she
went
had
to
some
the bathroom.
experience.
Yeah. But she felt like she needed to use the toilet, so she went to the bathroom. And when she went to the bathroom, she said she sat on the toilet and she felt something coming, but it was not what she thought. So she's like, girl, you could have born in the toilet.
Oh my gosh. That's how she started out to grow so big.
So she ran out the bathroom and she called for my dad. She calls him Chubby. She said, Chubby, the baby coming. Go next door and call the midwife. So my dad goes next door and he calls the midwife. And they come back and the midwife forgot the scissors to cut the umbilical cord. So she sends daddy to go and get, and by the time he comes back, I'm there already.
Okay. I was just going to think that maybe he come with a cutlass.
No. Everybody says, I'm a daddy's girl. But my mom says she may have been born on his birthday, so she's a birthday gift for him.
Right.
But she's a Mother's Day gift for me.
Yes.
So I'm a daddy's girl, but I'm also a mommy's girl.
Wonderful. I love it. I want to hear stories from you. What would you want to tell us?
Okay, so my earliest memory is from being 4 years old. And even though I was born on the quarantine where my mother is from, we lived in Victoria, where my dad is from. So I'm a Victorian girl as well.
Yes.
And I remember that it was a very strange time in Guyana. I went to the Swami school there in Covenjon. And at that time, not a lot of black people, children, went to those kinds of schools. And I said to my dad, how come y'all send me to Swami school? My dad said, well, you know, your grandmother was actually Hindu. I said, my grandmother was Hindu. I don't know no black Hindu. He said, your grandmother was mixed.
Okay.
She had Indian ancestry and African ancestry. So she was a Hindu. She went to the mandir, and right next to the mandir there was the school. So when they were looking for a school to send me to, my mother was working in Cope and John, and the school was close by.
Right.
So they were like, okay, when your mother is going to work, she'll drop you off at school, and then she'll just continue down the road to work. And I remember that I had two best friends. One was Farah Mohammed, she was Muslim, and one was Shirani, she was Hindu. And Shirani used to go into the mandir to pray, and we would stand at the door, and we would peep in, and I would see the various gods,
deities and
with
stuff.
the six hands, and and I was always afraid. And she used to say, "Don't be afraid. It'll be fine. They won't do you anything." And I was like, "Okay, no problem." And one afternoon, my dad came to pick me up from school, and there was a little child that was misbehaving. And his grandmother or aunt or whoever it is, a bigger person that came to collect him, said, if you don't behave, I'm gonna put this black man on you, and this black man gonna bite you. And she was pointing to my father.
Wow.
And so I turned to look at Daddy, and he was stone-faced. And I turned to look at her, and I was a very mouthy child. I didn't take anything sitting down. So I said, what you saying about my father? What you saying about my father? And she kind of just laughed it off. When we got home, I said, Daddy, why this lady saying that she can put you to bite this child like if you're a monster or something? And he said, my child, you're young, but you're gonna learn about racism in this country. And he said that there's this thing that Indo-Guyanese did at that time, where they would demonize black skin and black men, especially if they were strapping men. And they do it so subtly that the children don't realize that that's what they're doing. But the children, because they're told these things, they grow up to fear black men, especially. And I said, well, why didn't you say anything? And he said, because anything we say is taken as an assault or wanting to have a war or a confrontation. When you're a black man, you can't just, it's not, nobody sees that as, okay, I'm just defending myself or I'm correcting something. They see it as a confrontation.
Right.
And he was like, this period that we're living in Guyana is not a period where black people are allowed to speak freely, to defend themselves. It's a different kind of dispensation. And I really couldn't understand what he was saying, but like I had these memories of this conversation.
Right.
And I was 4 at that time. And then 2 years later, we moved away and we migrated to St. Kitts.
Thanks for sharing that story, because oftentimes we don't know the origins or the manifestations of the legacies we have with racial distrust. And a platform like this is open to those discussions. If I might interject, you have your, what's her name again?
Farah.
Farah.
Yeah.
I have my Lalita.
Yes.
I was at Buxton Government Secondary School, and Lalita was this tiny Indian girl that came. But she was my best friend. Look, we wore out some socks. Toes and heels we didn't have, just the middle, because we're doing Chinese skipping. And she used to pick, when the guys playing cards at school, she would pick the winner. She always knew. But what I remember with Lalita is that she taught me how to read comics, and the only comics I could read to this day were the Hindu comics.
Wow.
And she'd tell me about Prahlad and Sita and Rama and how she used to do her mouth and talk and so on. I used to so enjoy them. And I remember distinctly, one day I took her to my grandmother's house. And in the yard we had these big sapodilla trees. My uncle used to watch from the next yard. Nobody could touch these trees, because as soon as they come in the yard, they would go to the trees and he'd say, hey! And they don't know where he's coming from. So this day, I took Lalita. We opened the gate. My grandmother wasn't home. and we went to the sapodilla trees. We had to duck under them, they were so low. And we picked sapodillas. We ate, we picked, we just squeezed and we picked and we ate. And then we were done, we put in plastic bag. And then we walked out the yard and went back to school. I didn't hear my uncle. I didn't see him. And the next day, when he said to me, "Who was that? Is your little friend?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh." My uncle was a very gruff guy. I remember that story because Lalita and I met up just recently. And she said, "We were best friends, eh?" And she remembered the sapodilla. And I told her about my uncle, how he was so gruff. But I think in that time, my uncle knew how delicate a balance it was and how she would feel if he shouted. Because she was this little Indian girl in this black community, and I brought her home. Also, the land that my uncle bought was from a Portuguese guy with an East Indian wife. So we had this mixed living there, and he was able to not behave like he would to other black people and say, "Hey, stop picking the sapodilla," or whatever. I always thought he was so wise. And race relationships start with childhood, and to this day we caught up and we're friends. We talk about this, eating the tamarind syrup from the same people, spits and everything. So thank you so much for that story and bringing that back to my mind. So after age 4, what happened?
The next memory I have is age 6. And I think my memories are associated with major life events during my childhood. And at age 6, we actually migrated to St. Kitts. And so we migrated because my parents were concerned about the race relations. And my father thought that Guyana was no place for children to grow up at that time. And he thought that if we moved away, we wouldn't be seen just for our skin color, but we would have an opportunity to live and grow and a fair shot to succeed in a different society. And now as an adult, I think that's so strange because, you know, we were born in Guyana and he thought that we would have a better shot as foreigners in another man's country. Than in our own country. But that just goes to show you the state of affairs at that time in Guyana.
And that is not even the 60s.
Exactly.
I was surprised to hear the story because that's a 60s story. My sister was born in 64 and my mother used to say she's Warish because she borrowed wartime. You know, and Buxtonian, so you know what that history is. But it's very eye-opening to hear that in your time they had that going on.
And that was 1999.
Wow. Yep.
And so we moved to St. Kitts. And of course, I had to leave my friends behind, Farah and Shirani, my best friends. And I went to a new place. And there are just very specific things that I remember about going to St. Kitts. One was the accent. The accent is very different. And I can tell you, because I spent so much time in St. Kitts, when I get angry, I speak in a Kittitian accent.
Wow.
I can't control it, but when I'm angry, I don't sound Guyanese. I sound like
that means you assimilated.
Yes.
Because when I'm angry, I'm straight up Buxtonian.
Yes.
Creolese and everything.
Yes. And I also remember that they were so in tune with their culture and their heritage. And I remember I used to watch this program on ZIZ TV station. And it was called Under Banyan Tree. And there was this Rasta man called Rastambura Kitwana. And at that time he looked pretty young, and I watched him on TV since that time, like around 6 until like he got much older, because I have images of him being young and images of him being very old, and he passed away recently. And what he did on this TV show was to sit under this tree called the banyan tree. I think it was in the Independence Square in St. Kitts. And he would tell stories. And I thought this was exceptional, because I never saw anybody pay so much attention to a man just sitting under a tree telling stories. Like sitting under a tree, sitting outside telling stories is something quite normal for us.
Yes.
But I was impressed that they gave him his own TV show.
Wow.
Yeah, they wanted to make sure that children and adults and everybody all across St. Kitts were able to watch this. And over the years, Rastambora Kitwana told many different stories. And until a day like today, I always think of him. And recently, I saw a flyer pop up on my Facebook page a few days ago. And when I opened the flyer, it was a guy who I know from performing in the same poetry circles with him.
Yeah.
And he's hosting a series of poetry workshops. And Rastambora Kitwana is dead. But guess what those workshops are called? Under the banyan tree.
See that?
Yes, so I thought,
legacies.
yes,
Yes.
the influence, the work, the legacy of Rastambora Kitwana is living on.
Yes.
And so I think about how important stories are. How we think that, okay, maybe it's not having an impact, but you don't know until you actually see it. And now I have seen the legacy, this man that I watched on TV as a 6-year-old
Yes.
continue on now, and I'm 30.
Yes. You see, that's the legacy of stories. When we hear stories, they affect us at the cellular level.
Yes.
Oxytocin bubbles up.
Yes.
And then we get to this place that we can remember. And if we think of storytelling, we already have access to children's minds. They're ready fields. So that's why it's important to tell our stories, because it goes a long way. Children, they stay with children.
Yes.
And the fearful thing is that the bad stories stay as well as the good stories. But I don't worry so much about those because I have a thinking about those. What do you think about bad stories and good stories? Any idea?
For me, I think that the bad stories, you will hear them, they'll shock you, perhaps they'll stay with you. But I feel like when it comes to the good stories, they inspire you. And having a memory, and having just a memory and being inspired are two different things.
Right.
So you may have the memory of the bad story, but the good story inspires you to do something. It's like a call to action. And also it comes to you in the moments where you least expect it. Like my stories come to me at very random moments. And I think to myself, okay, I needed this in this time. Like I did not know that we were going to be having this conversation today. I didn't even know you were in Guyana. And look at how that story of Rastambora Kitwana came to me a few days ago, and I'm able to tell it now.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything for its own season. And so when I think of bad stories and good stories, I think of them all on the landscape of knowing. All of them.
Yeah.
So I don't shy away from the stories of racism, of disruption, or all of those. They belong there so they can contextualize our lives, because somebody would need that some point in time. And it's reality. It's a reality. So I'm very thankful for that story. I'm very grateful for that story. Those of you who are listening, if it's for you, just talk to us about your stories. When did you get a paradigm shift? When did you get that shift? Because it seems like some shifts been going on for you, because you remember that story and you begin to think of it in an adult way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that happened for me when I moved back to Guyana. So I moved back to Guyana in 2013.
So what happened when you moved back?
Okay, so in 2013, I decided that I was going to move back to Guyana. And my parents were like, nope, you're not coming back to Guyana, because they have a bad taste in their mouth from the Guyana that they left behind. And I decided I was going to use the opportunity when I'm going to pursue my bachelor's to come to the University of Guyana. Because they can't say no to education, right?
You're right.
So I came back and I went to the University of
So
Guyana.
where did you stay?
I stayed on campus in the dorm.
So you were a foreigner in Guyana?
Yes, culture shock.
Like what?
Big culture shock. So, for example, catching a bus. I had no memory of catching a bus in Guyana. So I didn't know what you needed to do. I didn't know how to flag the bus, which bus went where. And so I actually caught the wrong bus. And I ended up somewhere past UG on the East Coast going towards BV, that side going. And the driver's like, where are you going? I'm like, to UG. He's like, we passed Eugene.
Yes.
But he did me a favor when he dropped off her, when he brought me back and he drove me right into the campus. And I was like, this is the campus. It's not what the pictures look like. And somebody overheard me. They were laughing and they were like, those pictures probably from back in the day when UG was UG. And I was like, what does that mean? So then I had to find out for myself. And living in the dormitory, you know, there was a problem with water. Sometimes the water would cut off. You would be in the shower, showering, and when you want to rinse your skin, you have to tell the person, turn off your pipe so I could rinse my skin.
Okay.
Things like that you had to learn. But bigger than that, I had to relearn the culture because I was coming from a very different society. St. Kitts is a generally homogeneous society. They grew up as a homogeneous society with mostly people of African descent in their society. And other people are most likely foreigners or maybe new generations of people, not original generations of people. So their society didn't experience the brunt of racism, what we experienced in our plural society. And so coming back, I didn't really have much of a concept of what to expect other than that memory that I had at 4. And so I would be on campus, and what I noticed was that young people don't subscribe to racism, you know. You saw so many interracial couples on campus, but then they would hide from their parents. So you would see an Indian girl and a black boy kissing on campus, and when one of the girl's parents come to collect her, she goes far away from the boy and waits for her parents, or they wouldn't see each other on weekends. They would only hang out on campus during the week because their parents couldn't know. And one thing I observed was that sometimes they would graduate from UG and get married against their parents' will, and they would move away from their parents because they didn't want any part of this racism. And so I started to see how this society at different levels, there were different things that were going on. And I started to think about that memory that I had at 4. And I wondered what had kept racism alive in our society.
Very good question.
Yeah.
And it's a question that's so pertinent today. What is keeping it alive? And, you know, and how is that thing that's keeping it alive fed, grown, bred? Do you have any answers?
Yes, my theory is that politics and the want for power and control, that's what keeps racism alive in our society. I feel like the politicians know that if there was no racism, if there was no race voting, they would actually have to do pretty hard work. Like they'd have to come with good policies. They'd have to really be focused on development to get the votes of Guyanese citizens. But if you keep the racism alive, you can just sow distrust and say, oh, don't vote for this person that doesn't look like you because they're going to cheat you. They're going to treat you poorly. But that's not necessarily true. But if you tell the people that and you remind them of what happened in the 60s, if you remind me of what happened when I was 4, then you're conjuring up all of these bad memories. If you remind my parents of what they went through, they will again taste that bad taste in their mouth, and they will hold on to those old narratives, and then nothing will change. And so I feel like the politicians have figured out that this is the way, the easy way that we can get elected to office. If we poke and we prod at these bad memories that people had from back in the day when there were issues with races. Having issues among races is natural because it's different people from different cultures, different backgrounds that were forced into this space, and they didn't have the opportunity to organically learn how to coexist. You had the Caucasians who were the enslavers who were basically manipulating us, and now we've got the politicians who are manipulating us in the same way. So I feel like
so the colonized have now adapted the ways of the colonizer to recolonize the people. But I'm wondering too about, this is what you're saying now is very conscious. What is the responsibility of the people who are sensitive to this now in terms of handling these narratives? Like, your parents now know that these are people who do that. What is their responsibility in overcoming that? Know that we know that that's a trick and that's the game.
Yeah.
So that we bring it to the fore. We know what's happening. How do we now operate with those narratives?
I feel like we have a responsibility to go right back to these stories. Like my story that I went back to when I was 4 years old, right? When I go back to that story now, I use it as an example to show how this racism is passed on from one generation to another. And I say it's our responsibility to unpack that and say that's not our story. Those things that you experience, that your experience with racism is not my experience with racism. And I don't have to hate a person that looks different to me because that was your story. Because if you look at my story organically, my best friends were Indo-Guyanese girls.
Yes.
Organically, without anybody putting us together and telling us to be friends. That happened naturally. And so it is possible for us to coexist. It is possible for us to get along. So my responsibility is to tell that story that I experienced, of how I experienced racism, and also tell that story of how that was not the and-all and the be-all of my experience with the other ethnic group. On my own, without this woman inserting herself into my story, I had a good experience. And I feel like it's the responsibility of all of us to do that, to point to cases where we did coexist, we did work together, we did have, you know, a collective interest at heart, and then point to the stories which are really anomalies where people external to our stories, beginning with the colonizers, have been poking and prodding at us to encourage us to become racist.
Yep. So, the question would be, if a person of one ethnicity makes a disparaging remark of a person to a person of another ethnicity, should we think that that is racism? How do we take that?
I think we should see it, if it depends. If it is something directly related to race, then it is racism. If it's not directly directed to race, it might not be racism. I think we've got to engage that person in a conversation.
Yes.
To see, you know, where are these thoughts generated from? We might find that it has nothing to do with race. It might just be just the thought that they have about that person based on ignorance or, you know, not knowing enough. As well as we might see that it is related to race, but I don't think we should just judge it as racism right off the bat, because then we get nowhere. We've got to engage each other in conversations. Because, for example, let's take my same story as an example. That child would grow up to be afraid of African Guyanese men. And you might think, oh, this person just wants to be racist. But you don't know what was told to that person as a child. So if you have that conversation and you say, well, why are you afraid of these people? And then he goes, well, when I was small, my grandmother used to tell me that if I misbehave, these black men will come and bite me. These black men will come and take me away. That formulates a certain narrative in a child's mind, and their first encounter with racism may have been that, and that may have sown the seeds of racism in their life. Whatever else they may have heard in their homes, that person didn't have a choice as a child to develop their own ideas. But now as an adult, they have unconscious biases that they don't even realize that it was it was sown in their lives from such an early age.
So what we're seeing there is people operating out of consciousness or beliefs and practices that they have formulated in their minds. And sometimes they might not even be aware of what they're doing, because it shows the knock-on effects, the radical practice that your father did, you know, move you away totally. And you have this new experience, and that becomes part of your journey. And we're just talking about the Joe Harry window. Yes. So it's like that lady who said that the black man will bite you. Maybe she doesn't even see herself as being racist. So like we were just saying off camera, we have to be reflective on our practices and our beliefs and test them.
Yes.
Test them ourselves.
Yes.
Then we can grow as a society and a people. And if not even talking about society and as people, as an individual,
Yes.
how do we grow so big?
Yes.
What is the fertilizer that fuels our mind? Is it
Yeah.
hate? Is it dissent? Is it disruption? Is our go-to racism? I remember going to school in America as a Guyanese. My lens was never racism. I would be in classes and people would color everything through a racist lens. And that wasn't my go-to. Because for me, I grew up in the Bornam era with men learning that we are one people. One nation, one people, one destiny. And growing up with so many East Indian friends, Portuguese, whatever, comfortable. I didn't see the white man. So I didn't have that narrative in me at the time to even think about that. So when I walk the world, that's not my go-to. I'm not stupid, mind you.
Yes.
And I have
I'm
to
not
be
naive.
aware
Yes.
that these things are going on, but that's not the way I walk. That's not my go-to. Yes.
I think the same for me because I'm cognizant about the stories sowing seeds of racism or history of colonization and even some aspects of religions that sow seeds of racism. But I don't automatically hold that against the person. That's one. And I don't automatically think that it's a deliberate act. I think about what is the thing behind it? What is the thing motivating it? What is the thing that sowed those seeds in the first place? And I want to interrogate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think this has been good.
Yes.
So there we have it, people. How you grow so big. Don't take this as a sum total of Elsie and Harry's story. Our stories are complex, they're multi-layered, and all that kind of stuff. But this is just a window into how she's grown and the journey she's on. So I thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And people, press that button, like, follow, subscribe, and share it like food. Meta G, Okro, Kalaloo, Pepper Pot, whatever it is, share it. Thank you very much and walk good.
Yes.